All right, in this video, we're going to talk about how to draft an offer. It won't be every detail. We'll do that in person or we'll do that over the phone, but it's going to be the major points. Now, this video is going to be from the perspective of a seller. We're going to talk about how I present an offer to a seller so that if you're a buyer, you can understand what a seller is being told, how they're being coached by their realtor when they're looking at an offer, because you might not realize it, but price is not the only thing, or sometimes not even the most important thing to a seller when they're looking at offers and considering offers. Now, our market's been a little crazy lately, as has a lot of people's, a lot of areas. We've experienced what's called multiple offers, meaning in a 24-hour period, we might receive up to 7 offers. In other states, it's worse than that. Here, the most I've ever been in on is 7 offers. Right now, as of October 26th, 2022, we're not seeing that as much. It might be 2 offers instead of 7, and not as frequently multiple offers, but it's really important that when you submit an offer, you treat it as though you might be one of multiple offers that the seller is going to receive. Now, again, this is from the perspective of the seller and how they look at an offer and how they're being coached. Number one, the first thing I need from a buyer is their legal names. We want to make sure the only people's names on the offer are people who are also on the pre-qualification letter. So if I receive an offer and I have a pre-qualification letter, which I'm going to require, we want to make sure the buyer is actually qualified to buy the house. I want to make sure the names on the pre-qualification letter match the name on the offer. That's very important. The next thing is price. The buyer needs to tell us what they are offering on the property. This can be an indication of maybe their maximum budget. It could be they're just throwing a number out there to see if it sticks, but it's a starting point. Now, what we can assume is that a seller is most likely to sell a house if the offer is at the list price. However, they are not obligated to do that. There are many things in the offer that matter to a seller, and just because you submit a list price offer does not mean the seller is obligated to sell the property. Now, the next thing on the offer that's important is the amount of earnest money. And I will probably do a little video about earnest money, but basically think of it as a good faith deposit on the house. It's not money that's in addition to the price of the house. It's just, we're going to go ahead and put part of the money up to let you know that we're serious about buying this house. When I am presenting an offer to a seller, sometimes if that amount is very low, like $500 on a, $250,000 house, they may be concerned that this buyer doesn't have much, quote, skin in the game. They want to make sure that that amount is an amount that will hurt if the buyer just changes their mind and walks away. So a seller may consider countering the amount of earnest money to make sure that that buyer has something on the line and is not just going to change their mind and walk away from the purchase. Another thing that's important is the loan type, or what type of financing that it's going to be. Now, a lot of people assume cash is king. You've heard that a lot. Cash does sometimes influence a seller because the timeline from contract to close is typically much shorter. And we don't run the risk of the buyer not being able to be qualified when the lender runs their credit those last few days as they're verifying employment, W-2s, taxes, and all of that stuff. However, buyers do not show up at the closing table with an aluminum briefcase and a handcuff tied to their arm with a briefcase full of cash. That is not how people close. So people aren't actually showing up with cash. They're showing up with a certified check, just like any other buyer is. So we still would like to see proof of funds. If I am coaching my seller and one of the offers is cash, we want to see proof of funds, a bank statement, some sort of letter from a bank that says these buyers have a liquid amount of money in an account where they can either liquidate the money or it's already liquid and close by this specific date. If it is a loan type, that may influence the seller into being less open to an offer. There are some loan types that are a little more stringent on some particular aspects of the appraiser's inspection. For example, on a conventional loan, it's okay if there is some chipped or peeling paint or maybe some deteriorated wood on the outside. You will have had your home inspection if you're doing your due diligence, and you have decided whether or not you're okay with purchasing the house like it is. And maybe you say, look, this is not really important to me. I'll paint the house after I get it. I'll replace that wood myself. But FHA, VA, they are not, and USDA, they are not going to allow that house to close with chipped or peeling paint. There's also some other specific requirements. So there are loan types that, while they are great for the buyer because of their specific down payment requirements or their buyer assistance programs, it can negatively impact a seller's willingness to contract with a buyer who has that particular loan type. So if at all possible, it is great if you can purchase a house with a conventional loan. And just as a caveat, not all conventional loans require 20% down. You can do 3% or 5% or more. You need to talk to your lender about that, because loan type does impact whether or not you are likely to be chosen for a contract on a house. Another feature of an offer is whether or not the buyer will be doing an appraisal. If I'm coaching my seller and I have two offers that all other things are equal, and one says we're not going to do an appraisal, that's going to win every time. Every appraiser that goes to a house is going to get a different value. They just are. They're going to get a slightly different square footage, maybe, give or take 10 or 15 feet, and they're going to get a different value. So if I have two competing offers, I'm going to coach my seller, if everything else is equal, to accept the offer from the buyer who does not have an appraisal contingency. Now, a lender is going to require, in almost every instance, they're going to require an appraisal, and that's to protect themselves. But if you're paying cash or if you're putting a substantial amount down, it is possible that you can submit an offer without an appraisal contingency. If you're a buyer and you're considering doing that, you got to talk about comps, make sure that we've reviewed comps, because I don't want you buying a house that is overvalued. So we got to have that conversation. But that is one way of improving an offer, is to remove that appraisal contingency. Another component is inspections. Now, the Mississippi state contract says that within 10 business days, you have to have your home inspection done. If you are doing one, they are optional, but that has to be completed, and a list of requested repairs must be submitted to the seller within the 10 business day period. Now, we're going to count the first business day after the contract as day 1. I will tell you what day 10 is. And by that 10th business day, we need to have received from a buyer and their agent a list of requested repairs. And it is possible that a buyer may remove an inspection contingency. Maybe they're an investor. They're super comfortable with doing flips. They don't care. They've looked at the house. They're comfortable with it, and they're going to remove that. If there are two competing offers, everything else being equal, one has an inspection contingency and one does not, the one without it is going to win every time. However, if you're my buyer, I'm going to ask you to sign a waiver that I advised you to get a home inspection and you decided to proceed without one, because I think they're super important. A good compromise is, if you are in a highly competitive offer situation, you may want to consider doing that home inspection and reserving your right to withdraw from the contract if there's any deal breakers on there that the seller won't repair. But we're going to say in the offer, hey, we're going to do the inspection, but we're not going to ask you to fix anything. We just want to make sure we're comfortable with the results and that we're going to proceed, but we're not going to ask you to fix anything. If I have two competing offers where everything else is equal and one just has the regular inspection contingency picked and the other offer has, we're going to do inspections but not ask you to fix anything, that offer is going to win almost every single time. So that's another way to improve your offer if you're a buyer. Another type of inspection would be a septic inspection, a pool inspection. Maybe they're doing a mold and mildew inspection. There are all kinds of inspections. So all of those inspections have to be done within the 10 business days after an executory contract. One inspection that is not limited to that time frame is the pest inspection. Our lingo is a WDIR, which stands for a wood destroying insect report. Almost every time the seller is who is tasked with providing that and paying for that. The cost ranges from $60 to $135. Generally, there are several companies that do that. Now, this report is only good for the bank for 30 days because termites can come and go and do damage in a very quick amount of time. So we are not limited to the 10 business days. That is generally done around 2 weeks before closing. And it is looking for termite damage, termite infestation, or carpenter bee damage or infestation. So that, whether or not the buyer or seller is paying for that, believe it or not, can be a determining factor of who gets the contract. If everything else is equal, but that offer on it is asking the seller to pay for that inspection, and the other offer is saying we'll pay for it as the buyer, that may be $107 difference that makes somebody get the contract and another person lose out. So if you're a buyer and you are in a very competitive offer situation, you may want to consider saying that you, the buyer, will pay for that pest inspection and not ask the seller to do that to make you more competitive. Another aspect that's very important, very, very important, is seller paid closing costs. Be sure that you look for my video on closing costs because it requires a video all on its own. It can be very confusing. But most times what affects who gets a contract is how much, if any, closing costs a buyer is asking a seller to pay. Now, we went through a phase where we were seeing a lot of buyer seller paid closing costs being requested. Then we went through a super competitive phase with very low interest rates where we were seeing no seller paid closing costs requested or being granted. Now we're in a phase with interest rates up a bit where we are seeing a buyer ask a seller to pay for closing costs, and they're using that money to do what's called a buy down. Now, you need to talk to a lender about a buy down. I don't practice banking, but it is a way to make the buyer, allow the buyer to have a more affordable interest rate for the first 2 years of their loan. And they are, in a lot of instances, asking the seller to help cover those costs. And if they are, there should be an exact amount on the offer and a statement that that is what the money's being used for. So if you're very competitive with somebody else in an offer and everything else is equal, whoever asks for the most closing cost is generally going to lose out in the contract. So the more you can pay in your own closing costs and your own buy down, if you're doing that, the better for you. So a buyer should consider lowering that amount or paying all of their own closing, and a seller should really pay attention to how those seller paid closing costs impact their bottom line. Now, I'll always provide a net sheet to you when you're considering offers so you can see a very good estimate of what your check is going to look like at the closing table, minus any prorated taxes and minus your payoff if you have an existing mortgage. So we're going to look at actual numbers, but closing costs probably impact the bottom line more than anything else. Another component of the offer is, when does the buyer want to occupy the home? Maybe you are a seller who needs to close on your house, but you want to stay in it and rent it back from your buyers for a couple of months so that you can get some things in order to move to your next place. Or maybe the buyer doesn't want to move in for a couple of months, and so they're asking you to close early and they would rent the house back to you. Maybe somebody, wants to move in and close, occupy the house quicker than you're able to be out of the house. So pay attention to those dates. They're very, very important. The closing date is very important. You want to make sure that you can actually be physically present, or that you're going to be in town, or that you can make other arrangements for how you're going to receive your closing packet. So how that closing date impacts your current living situation and your ability to attend a closing is very important. Make sure you look at that. Also, everything else being equal, if I have sellers who have a vacant home and we have one offer that says we'll close in 30 days and another offer that says we'll close in 60 days, the 30-day is going to win almost every time in a vacant house or somebody who's ready to move. The longer that process drags out, the more things can go wrong, the more antsy a seller gets. They always want a quick closing on a vacant property. So it's good to have an agent pick up the phone, call the listing agent and say, let's talk about a possible closing date. What are your people thinking? How much time do they need? And you can know that and have that in your offer the very first time so that there's no countering going back and forth on a closing date or occupancy date. Now, there's a document called a property condition disclosure statement. There'll be a separate video about that. Make sure you look for that. That is the disclosure that the seller completes that says everything they have knowledge about on the property during the time that they owned and occupied the home. Now, this is not to take place or replace a home inspection. We are trusting the sellers to be honest and transparent about anything they know as far as leaks or termites or how old is the roof and does the ice maker work. So you want to make sure you've thoroughly reviewed every page of that, paying special attention to anything in that document that they've already disclosed does not work, because we can pretty much assume that a seller is going to be unlikely to honor a repair request for items that they have already disclosed do not work. Make sure you've looked at that, because that's very, very important. And you need to acknowledge that you've seen that already if it's been provided to you when you make the offer. Another thing is there is a section called special provisions. And in that section is where you might request some things like a home warranty, which covers your major mechanical systems for the first year of ownership. That's a thing that a lot of times I ask a seller to pay for. Now, if everything else is equal, and I'm an agent representing a seller and we're presenting offers, and I say we've got two offers, they're exactly the same, except this buyer has asked for you to pay for their home warranty. This one does not. Well, they cost about $500. So right there, you have eliminated yourself probably from the running if everything else is equal, because that seller is going to net $500 less if they go with you than if they go with the person who did not ask for a warranty. And you can always buy the warranty on your own after you close on the house. So just know that if you're competitive, all of these things I'm teaching you here are ways you can elect to improve your chances of getting chosen for the contract. I put in my offers that the buyers want the sellers to leave all utilities on for one day, one business day after closing. That's to just give you time to get to the utility companies with your warranty deed and get everything transferred over. Just a little side note to you, you may want to throw that in your offer. If you're working with me and I'm your buyer's agent, that's going to be in my offer. And one of the most confusing things about the Mississippi state contract that I find both sides misunderstand if it's not clearly explained is the offer expiration day and time. This is very confusing, so I want to be sure that you understand me, and this will be the last topic that we cover on this video. If I'm submitting an offer for my buyers, I'm going to say on that line what day and time my buyer's offer expires. That is all that day and time is. It is not a deadline by which the sellers must respond to you. Those two things are not related at all. It does not mean, hey, our offer, they have to respond to us by 5 p.m. tonight. No, they don't. No, they don't. They don't ever have to respond to you if they don't want to. They don't have to respond at all. That offer expiration day and time is exactly what it says. It's the day and time at which your offer expires. If the sellers respond to you and the timestamp on the offer is beyond your offer date and expiration, you are not required legally to honor that contract. It's not a contract. You're not legally required to honor that response at all. So it's really important that you understand the implications of making a short expiration time or a very lengthy expiration time. A super short expiration time of a few hours generally angers the seller, especially if it's on the first day on the market and they've got 6 showings scheduled. Well, they're going to wait and see how many offers they get, and they'll just put you to the side most likely, unless your offer is just chef's kiss. They're probably going to sit you to the side. If you allow too much time, however, you may allow so much time that a better offer than yours comes in, and you kind of sabotage your own offer. We generally like to see about a 24-hour offer expiration day and time. And if the seller accepts your offer in its current terms without countering anything in the offer before that offer expiration day and time passes, then you have a contract. If they counter you, then all negotiations are still game. Everything is still negotiable. You go back and forth until everyone gets to an agreement. So that's a lot. There's a lot to an offer, and there's a lot that helps make you stand out above your competition. And there's a lot of things that really might impact your living situation and the seller's bottom line. So make sure that you're thoroughly understanding all of these components, all of these options, that you're not eliminating important things like a home inspection without thoroughly understanding the impact of that. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below or send me a text message, because I want to make sure you understand. And if I'm your buyer's agent, we're going to be super competitive, and I'm going to coach you through all of this. And if you're my seller, I'm going to coach you through the implications of every single one of these points and why one offer might be better, even if their price is lower. Let me know if you have any questions.